You learned 1,000 new words yesterday. You did. But by tomorrow morning, 90% of them will be gone. Your brain will have erased them like they never existed. And here's the part that makes no sense. It did this on purpose. Not because you're lazy, not because you're bad at learning, but because your brain has a rule older than language itself. And that rule is destroying your fluency. When you sit down to study English, you open a vocabulary list, you stare at the word, you repeat it. You feel smart, you feel like something is sticking, but the moment you close the book, something catastrophic happens inside your skull. The neural pathways you just fired up begin to decay, not gradually, drastically. Psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered this in 1885 when he started memorizing nonsense syllables and timing how fast he forgot them. He found a curve, a precise mathematical pattern of forgetting that applies to every human brain, in every language, across every century. You forget 50% of new information within one day. Within a week, you've lost 70%. Without intervention, that number hits 90% within 30 days. That's not a flaw, that's a feature. Your brain is not designed to remember everything it encounters. It's designed to remember what matters. And here's the brutal truth. Isolated vocabulary lists signal to your brain that these words don't matter. They're not in context. They're not attached to emotion. They're not solving a problem. They're just floating there. So your brain deletes them to make room for information that does matter. But there's something stranger happening underneath this forgetting. Neuroscientist Bo Lotto has spent decades studying how the brain actually learns, and he discovered that repetition alone doesn't create memory. What creates memory is struggle, specifically the right amount of struggle at the right moment. He calls this desirable difficulty. When you encounter a word in a sentence, you have to think about its meaning. Your brain has to work. That struggle is the signal that says, "This matters. Remember this." But when you stare at a vocabulary list for 3 minutes, there's no struggle. There's just passive absorption. And passive absorption creates what researchers call shallow encoding. The information enters short-term memory and then evaporates. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Your brain doesn't just forget words randomly. It forgets words that are isolated. Linguist Paul Nation spent his entire career studying vocabulary acquisition in second language learners, and he found that words are never learned in isolation. They're learned through networks. When you learn the word reluctant, you don't just store that word. Your brain links it to related words: hesitant, unwilling, resistant. It links it to contexts where you've seen it. It links it to the emotional tone of the moment you learned it. Every new word is a node in an expanding web, and the more connections that node has, the more retrievable it becomes. This is why translation-only learning fails so catastrophically. When you learn English, your brain doesn't create a new language center that mirrors your native language. It creates new neural pathways that connect to existing patterns in your brain. The more different contexts and meanings you see a word in, the deeper those connections grow. A word you see once in a list has maybe 2 connections. A word you see in 5 different conversations, in 5 different emotional states, linked to 5 different concepts, has 100 connections. It's virtually impossible to forget. So why do you forget anyway, even when you try? Because there's another force working against you. It's called semantic satiation. Say a word out loud right now. Any word. Say it 20 times quickly. Language, language, language. Language, language, language. Keep going. What happens? The word loses its meaning. It stops sounding like a word. It becomes a sound, a noise. Your brain essentially numbs itself to that word. This is a real neurological phenomenon. Your neurons fire in response to novelty, but repeated firing to the same stimulus causes those neurons to become less responsive. They fatigue, they go dormant, and suddenly the word feels less real, less meaningful, less learnable. Here's the paradox. When you study hard, you often trigger semantic satiation. You sit down for 2 hours and review the same 10 words over and over. Your brain protests. It shuts down. The words feel less real with each repetition. But when you encounter those words naturally, spread across different conversations and contexts over days and weeks, semantic satiation never sets in. Your brain stays hungry for the meaning. It stays curious. It stays connected. And here's what you're not doing that ancient language learners did without thinking. They heard new words embedded in stories. Stories are the oldest technology for encoding memory. When you hear a word in a story, three things happen simultaneously. Your brain is tracking the narrative, which means you're generating emotion. Your brain is inferring the word's meaning from context, which means you're engaging in active problem solving. And your brain is encoding that word alongside the sensory details of the moment you heard it, the speaker's voice, the other characters, the emotional weight of the scene. By the time the story ends, that word has 100 connections. It's woven into narrative memory, and narrative memory is nearly impossible to forget. But you're not learning from stories, you're learning from lists, from apps that flash you a word for 5 seconds before moving to the next one, from textbooks that organize words by category rather than by meaning or emotional resonance, from systems designed for industrial age efficiency rather than how your brain actually works. Here's what makes this even more maddening. You have all the neuroscience. You know what works. Spaced repetition at the moment when you're about to forget. Contextual variety so your brain creates multiple retrieval pathways. Emotional engagement so your brain marks the word as relevant. Narrative embedding so the word becomes part of a story rather than an isolated symbol. Every single one of these conditions is available to you right now, but you're probably not using them. Instead, you're fighting your biology. You're expecting your brain to behave like a filing cabinet when it's actually built like a network. You're giving it lists when it wants stories. You're giving it repetition when it wants variety. You're giving it 5 isolated minutes when it needs 5 scattered weeks. Your brain isn't refusing to learn new words, it's refusing to pretend that your learning method works. So the question isn't why your brain refuses to learn. The question is whether you're ready to stop fighting how it's designed, whether you're ready to stop looking for a shortcut and start looking for the long game. Because fluency isn't built in a semester, it's built through 1,000 scattered moments where a word appears in context, carries meaning, connects to something you care about, and gets encoded alongside narrative and emotion, rather than alongside panic and the ticking clock of a study timer. And the moment you stop trying to force learning and start letting your brain do what it evolved to do, something shifts. The words stop feeling like obligations. They start feeling like discoveries, and they start staying. You thought your brain was refusing to learn new words, but your brain has been trying to teach you something all along.